Yet the winter of 2005, body of a young woman had been discovered on the outskirts of Miami, near the alligator-infested Florida Everglades. A local power company worker was driving by the empty lots of an unbuilt cul-de-sac when he spotted something. Upon realizing it was a body, he immediately thought she was dead, but upon closer examination, he realized that she was still alive, but just barely. The woman, a 21-year-old Ukrainian immigrant, had been beaten, raped, and all but left for dead. When she woke up at the hospital, she could barely understand where she was, let alone remember what happened to her in the preceding hours. When police pressed her further, she began recalling seeing Hispanic or Eastern European men beating her and pushing her into a car. But that's all that she remembered. About a month earlier, the woman had checked into the Airport Regency Hotel and had been living there ever since. She had been working on a cruise ship, and when she cut her finger while on the job, the cruise ship operator put her into the hotel to recover. Now, she was in a much dire situation. But who was responsible? Who wanted her dead? Alan Foote from the Miami Police Department took the lead in the investigation. Him and his colleagues began by interviewing the people that may have known the victim or have interacted with the victim leading up to that fateful night. They initially set their sights on the man that the woman spent time with that evening. He was a Greek national, a bit older than her, and someone with whom she worked on the cruise liner. Could this have been a crime of passion, perhaps a case of jealousy? But he was quickly ruled out when he had a rock-solid alibi. The investigators learned that he had dropped her off at the hotel earlier in the evening as shown by the surveillance cameras, and then had spent the rest of the evening with a friend. They also looked into the barman, who it seemed followed the woman into the hotel room and then returned without her. Could he have anything to do with her disappearance? But after rigorously interviewing him, he too was cleared when it was confirmed that he simply escorted her to her room and nothing more. Eventually, the leads stopped. Everyone who needed to be questioned was questioned, and the detectives ran out of paths they could follow. The case was slowly turning cold. From the beginning, the hotel was concerned that this was some kind of a scheme to sue the hotel for damages and make out with a lot of money. Maybe this was the young girl's plans all along, and all the bad things that had happened to her were part of this premeditated scheme. Horrible things had happened to her, but nothing could be ruled out. A civil suit against the hotel would surely be coming. Not wanting to take any chances with litigation, the hotel decided to hire their own private investigator. That private investigator would be Ken Brannon. Ken Brannon was the private investigator you hire when your existing detectives run out of options and throw their hands in the air. He was originally from Long Island, New York, and had been both a police officer with the city as well as a federal agent with the DEA. He spoke with the bluntness of a New Yorker, sees people quickly, and didn't hesitate to tell you right away if he liked you or not. Although Ken was hired by the hotel in an effort to absolve them of any responsibility of this heinous crime, his ultimate goal was to discover the truth. Right after he was hired, he gathered the hotel's top brass in a conference room and told them that he's gonna seek the truth regardless if it makes the hotel look bad. The hotel management grudgingly thought it over and agreed to go forward with the investigation. The first thing that Ken did was to meet up with the lead Miami PD detective Alan Foote. He told Alan that he used to be a cop for many years and that they're now a team and that they shouldn't hold any secrets from each other. He also added that if he helped to solve this case, Alan would still get all the credit as it's his case. Alan agreed. Next, Ken began studying the surveillance footage. He couldn't understand how this woman entered the hotel but never left, yet somehow ended up in a random field on the outskirts of Miami. In one of the surveillance videos, he viewed the same woman leaving the hotel at around 3 a.m. and then returning back 15 minutes later. Why would she leave her room at such a late hour? Was she up to something no good? Upon a closer investigation, it became obvious that she went to a nearby gas station to purchase some cigarettes. However, as she was going back to her room, something interesting happened. While waiting in the hotel lobby for an elevator, she had a quick interaction with a man who was also waiting for the elevator. Moments later, they both disappeared into the elevator with the young woman never to be seen leaving the hotel again. Who was this young man talking to the woman? Did they know each other? Or did they just meet up for the first time? From the way they interacted, it didn't seem like they knew each other, Ken reasoned. Ken carefully looked over all the surveillance footage but couldn't find a trace of her leaving the hotel. She had to leave the hotel somehow, so why wasn't she captured by any of these cameras? Ken thought to himself. One big advantage of this hotel is that it was equipped with cameras everywhere, both inside and outside, so it would have been fairly difficult for the young woman to leave unnoticed. Ken took a break to rest his eyes and promised himself he'll have another look the next day. The very next day, Ken began looking over their surveillance videos and realized something peculiar. And then, right then and there, Ken had his first big break. He noticed the same individual, a big black guy wearing glasses, the same guy who was waiting for an elevator the night before, rolling a suitcase and leaving the hotel at around 5 a.m. And then an hour later, this individual returned, but without the suitcase. There was nothing strange in any of that except for one small detail. As this guy was stepping off the elevator, his suitcase got stuck in the crack between the elevator floor and the lobby floor. This suitcase must have gotten stuck so hard that this man, a huge 250 to 300 pounds, 6'4" individual, needed to give it a hard tug in order to free it back up so that he could continue to roll it. Ken found that very interesting. He remembered the countless times he had rolled his carry-on luggage through airports, cities, and streets, and almost never had to free his suitcase the same way this guy just did. The only thing that came to mind was the luggage. It had to be heavy, very, very heavy. And at that moment, Ken realized what happened to the victim. She was in that suitcase. The next morning, Ken told Alan that he had discovered the guy responsible for the attack on the young woman. Alan didn't seem convinced. He couldn't believe that she was in that suitcase and was wheeled out of the hotel that night. But Ken was as sure as he'd ever been. He just needed to find out who this guy was and locate him. Finding this guy proved a lot more challenging than he thought. When inquired at the hotel if anyone had seen this guy before, he learned that that weekend there was some sort of a trade show at the hotel, and thus this guy might have been working at the trade show. He wasn't working for the hotel. So Ken went back to the surveillance. On one of the other videos, he noticed that his main person of interest was with another guy, and this guy had the word Mercury on his t-shirt. Initially, that word meant absolutely nothing to Ken, but he knew that must be a clue of some sort. Things clicked when he noticed the second guy had the writing Verado on the back of his t-shirt. Ken researched around and discovered that Verado was the name of a new outboard engine manufactured by Mercury Marine, the boat engine manufacturer. There had been a big boat show in Miami that February when the incident happened, and Mercury Marine had been showcasing some of their latest models there. A company called Centerline was hired to do food catering for the event, Ken had learned. This guy most likely worked for that company. After further investigation, it was discovered that this person might have gone to New Orleans to work for another catering company. Finding that individual, however, proved to be near impossible, as New Orleans had been hit by Hurricane Katrina, and with the city and the surrounding areas in complete disarray, nobody would know where this guy went. Fortunately, one of Ken's friends in New Orleans, a police captain he'd known for many years, looked into the matter and dug up some information about this guy. All he knew was that his name was Mike Jones, a name so common that it all but guaranteed to be meaningless. Ken had a name, but he had no idea where this Mike Jones might be. He could be anywhere in the US or even abroad, he reasoned. So Ken went back to the drawing board, thinking of ways of tracking him down. And then he had another breakthrough. Mike Jones seemed to move from job to job around the country working for various catering companies. And that's probably what he's doing right now, working at a similar job with some catering company in some part of the country. Ken compiled a list of 5 catering companies similar to the company where he worked in Miami. He then started calling them one by one and asking if a certain big individual by the name of Mike Jones was employed there. It didn't take long until he got a match. Mike Jones was working for a company called Ovations in Maryland. Soon, Detective Foote and one of his partners flew to Maryland to talk to him. Mike Jones was even bigger in person, but not in an imposing, intimidating way. He was super friendly and open. Liked by all his co-workers, he seemed like the last person in the world who could have committed a crime of such magnitude. During the conversation with the Florida detectives, Mike denied everything. But just before he ended the questioning, the detective asked Mike if he'd be willing to provide a DNA sample. Mike readily agreed. Although Alan felt that Mike had been truthful and even told Ken that they had the wrong guy, Ken was adamant that Mike Jones was indeed the right guy. Several months later, DNA testing came back with a match. Mike Jones was indeed the guy. When Ken and Alan flew back to Maryland to arrest him, Mike Jones continued to deny everything. Ken asked him what was inside the suitcase that he rolled out on the street that night at the Miami hotel. He answered that he just had clothes there. But when he pressed him as to why it was so heavy that it required an extra tug to get it off the elevator, Mike changed his story and said he had a lot of books there. Ken then asked Mike to name the last book he'd read. Mike was stumped. He couldn't name a single book. Still, even with all the DNA evidence, the case against Jones was weak. The victim couldn't prove it was him who assaulted her, and nobody could really prove their sex was not consensual. Without a solid conviction, it seemed that all this hard work was for nothing. But Ken, being the seasoned detective he was, knew that Jones had done this before. It was the ease with which he had acted throughout the whole process. From chatting up the victim, to rolling the suitcase with her body there, to talking to the cops, the man certainly had practice. The detective entered his DNA sample into CODIS, an FBI-administered nationwide DNA database. Once the results came back, they learned that Mike Jones was tied to 3 more cases, 1 in Colorado and 2 in Louisiana. The one in Colorado had been cold for more than 2 years. The victim was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman who had been picked up early on the morning of December 1st, 2005 by a stranger, a very large black man with glasses, who had offered her a ride and then talked his way into her apartment and raped her, holding his hand tightly over her mouth. 2 similar rapes happened in New Orleans, Louisiana, and these cases had cold for around 6 years. Later it was confirmed that Mike Jones had been in both Colorado Springs and New Orleans on the dates in question. After his sentence in Florida was up, he was flown to Colorado Springs to stand trial. Ultimately, he received a term of 24 years to life for 1 count of sexual assault with force and 12 years to life for the second count of felonious sexual contact. His Miami victim won a $300,000 settlement from the hotel and the hotel's security company. Ken Brannon was back doing his private detective work in Miami. He was enormously proud of the efforts that have locked Jones away. The cases they got him on, they're just the tip of the iceberg, he predicted. Once other jurisdictions start checking their DNA files on cases when this guy was at large, I guarantee you they will find more.